So despite the fact that I have no shortage of fantastic modern games in my collection, I always find myself drawn back to classic systems like the Master System, the Genesis, and what we're talking about today, the NES. What's going on, everyone? I'm Jay. Welcome to Square Pegs. Thanks for stopping by. Now, I've talked about this in the past. I've talked about 10 NES games that I go back to regularly, and we're going to revisit it today because I found myself playing a lot of NES lately. Let's kick things off with G.I. Joe, The Atlantis Factor. As much as I enjoyed the original G.I. Joe game on the NES, G.I. Joe The Atlantis Factor is probably my favorite, just because of the slight changes it makes. So we kick things off with a sort of Bionic Commando map to choose your missions on. You get to fight signature bosses and signature characters from the G.I. Joe universe, like at the end of level 1, you fight Road Pig, which is super awesome. And then the characters that you're able to play with are amazing. You start off with General Hawk, which is great. You can also unlock Wetsuit, Storm Shadow, Roadblock, Duke, Snake Eyes, Stalker, Big Bear, Spirit, Gung Ho. There's a huge cast of characters that you're able to play here. There's a bunch of different items. There's a bunch of different weapons that you're able to use. And the game is just fun. Like, this takes everything that original G.I. Joe game did on the NES and just makes it better. I really love this one. And as a lifelong G.I. Joe fan, I think it's probably kind of expected, but the game is just fantastic, and it's a ton of fun to play. And there's a good challenge here too, right? Like, some of the bosses are really difficult, but I just love it. I think it's a fantastic game. I originally played these on a computer, but I love the NES versions as well. This is Ultima: Quest of the Avatar. I think of all the games on this list, Ultima: Quest of the Avatar is probably the one that people have the most difficulty getting into, just because, and I admit this freely, it is archaically designed when compared to things not even on a modern setting, but like things in the 16-bit generation. This feels like a relic compared to games like that. But for me, I love the Ultima series. I've always loved the Ultima series. And in particular, I really love the NES interpretations of the Ultima series because I found it to be significantly more accessible than the computer versions. This is a game that weighs your choices and weighs your morals as you start off to help you build a character, to create the avatar, to master the 8 virtues. And you start off by basically choosing a class by going through this personality test to find out which of the virtues is most important to you. And it's really clever. Like, that's always something I've admired in the Ultima games. And the combat is fun, because when you actually go into a fight, you go into almost this overworld map where you have to position your character to attack. Again, it's archaic by today's standards, or again, by 16-bit standards, but to me, it's something I still enjoy. It's not for everybody, and I understand that, but for me, the Ultima series in particular on the NES are things that I love and I still get into to this day. Up next, Kabuki Quantum Fighter. One of the weirder games on the NES, and something that I don't think anybody in their right mind probably would have thought, yeah, let's make a game set in cyberspace starring a Kabuki warrior. That sounds logical. That sounds like a legit thing that we need to do, but I tell you what, man, Kabuki Quantum Fighter just works. It's so good. It's developed by HAL Laboratories, so if you're familiar with Kirby, you're familiar with them. And it's brilliant. It's weird. Don't get me wrong. You are a cyber Kabuki fighter, but for some reason, it just works. Like, the combat is super simple. You have to collect different things in the game to be able to use your special powers, which are called chips in this game. As you collect them, those are how many you're going to be able to use, kind of like the different hearts and things in Castlevania. And the boss fights are great. The level designs are great. There's some really neat jumping mechanics in the game as well. Like, it just does everything incredibly well. And it's such a sincerely charming game because of just how bloody weird it is. Kabuki Quantum Fighter is fantastic. I know a lot of people haven't played this one, and you need to, because it's definitely worth your time. My personal favorite from the series on the NES, Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. As much as I loved the original Castlevania, the game that really got me into the series was Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. And it was probably because of the RPG elements, because let's face it, it played fast and loose with the Castlevania formula. This wasn't at all like the original. Beyond setting, It was a completely new approach to a game, and I just loved it. I loved what was essentially an open world at the time for an NES game. I loved being able to go in any direction I wanted. Now, sometimes I couldn't because the enemies were too strong, but I still enjoyed it. And it was something where I felt like when I was exploring the Transylvanian countryside in Castlevania 2 that I was really on a quest. Like, I think it fulfilled its name. And that was something that I felt was really important because it was a different approach. Now, I still love the original Castlevania, and I love Castlevania 3, but for me, the one I go back to the most frequently is Castlevania 2. It's been my favorite for a long time, and I think it's probably going to stay that way of the 3 NES games.
You can't beat the classics, and this is one of my favorite arcade games and one of my favorite ports on the NES. This is Popeye.
I am well aware that there are many people who will see the inclusion of Popeye, a black box game, on this list, and immediately roll your eyes and just make fun of me for being elderly, ancient, old, and decrepit. And you're probably right, but let me tell you a little bit about why I love Popeye. So, I loved the original arcade release of Popeye. I thought it was brilliant, and I loved the NES port because I think it just plays incredibly well. But my association with Popeye and my adoration of Popeye, and one of the reasons that I keep playing Popeye to this day, was because of my grandfather. My grandfather was a World War II Navy man, and growing up, he always told us that he was in the Navy with Popeye. He could draw a picture of Popeye, and that was proof enough for 6-year-old Jay that he did know Popeye. And I thought it was so cool that someone my grandpa knew was in a video game that I liked. It's silly, I understand that, but to me, it's one of those connections to him that I still have now that he's passed. And for me, Popeye will always be one of those constants in my life.
An unappreciated classic, this is Faxanadu.
Now, Faxanadu holds one of the places of infamy in my collection because it's a game I've never beaten. I've loved it for years, and this was one of those games that was a constant rental when I was a kid. This is something that when my mom would take me to the video store, I would grab something like Faxanadu or Crystalis, and it was just something I never bought. There was a bunch of weird games like that I loved, but I just never pulled the trigger on owning until I was older. And Faxanadu is one of them, and it's something that, as much as I love it, I've never beaten it. I've never sat down and taken the time to beat it. And I think I'm going to do that this year, because playing it again today to show this video, I remember why I like it so much and why it's so exciting. It's an action RPG. It's a little bit Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. It's a little bit Battle of Olympus, but it's decidedly its own thing because of just the overall appearance and the overall design of the game. Like, it's just an interesting title that is so well designed and so well put together that I can't help but enjoy it. Apparently not enough to beat it yet, but that's going to change this year.
Capcom does it again with a video game version of one of my all-time favorite comic strips. This is Little Nemo, the Dream Master.
When you consider the fact that Capcom drew inspiration for a video game from a comic strip that initially published in 1905 from the genius that is Winsor McCay, and you realize we got an incredible platforming game in Little Nemo, I can't say enough how much this excites me. Like, I am a huge comic fan. Like, my entire life, I have loved comic strips and comic books, and Little Nemo was one that I discovered when I was very young. There were collections of Nemo comics at the Fall River Public Library when I was growing up, and I used to read them and just be absolutely blown away by the creativity and just the overall design concepts involved in this comic. And to see Capcom take inspiration from those comics and make an incredible game despite the limitations of the NES was just magical. It's such a fantastic game and such a wonderful, beautiful platformer that, much like DuckTales, shows exactly what Capcom was capable of. Now, there's definitely some difficult parts of this game, there's definitely some challenging aspects of it, but it is something that if you sit down and play it, you're going to be absorbed by the charm of everything that is Nemo. We've got a couple new Nemo games coming out soon, but the first one from Capcom is always going to be the benchmark.
Not the first RPG I played, but probably my favorite on the console. This is the original Final Fantasy. 。
If I'm being honest, the original Final Fantasy might be one of the top 3 most influential games on me, just based on everything that it's impacted as I've gotten older. It was my favorite RPG on the NES, and still is. I loved the setting. I loved the globe-trotting that you had to do between the different ships you were able to pilot. It was something where it felt epic. It felt like a huge, important quest that you were on, and so many times games like this weren't able to portray that correctly, but Final Fantasy nailed it. The different characters you were able to create by using the different classes, the ability to kind of customize them as you go. Like, it wasn't just a set slate of things you were going to do every time. You had a little bit of customization that you were able to do by determining what weapons you were going to use, determining what spells you were going to teach your spellcasters, what party assembly you were going to do. That type of customization and those type of options really spoke to me. I could go on for hours about how important of a game this is, but when I look back at games that I still enjoy today, things like Skyrim, things like Persona 5, that all stems from Final Fantasy on the NES.
This is legitimately one of the best games on the NES. Doesn't matter if it's licensed or not. This game is just fantastic. This is DuckTales.
There was just something purely amazing about DuckTales, whether it was the original cartoon, the animated movie Secret of the Lost Lamp, or this game here from Capcom. Everything about that franchise just worked. And this game in particular is something where you could really see the skill that Capcom had to make an incredible game, because this game in particular holds up incredibly well against really every other piece from the Capcom lineup on the NES. It's as good as most Mega Man games. It's as good as other licensed games from Capcom. It is, dare I say it, the best Disney game that Capcom made. It just works. The importance of this game can't be overstated, because when you look at it, we realize that we had not only this original game, but we also had the remaster re-release that came out on the Wii U, PS3, and Xbox 360 generation. This game just has a staying power because of how good it is. Now, there were some changes from the original to the remaster, obviously, but the core gameplay is there, the core experience is there, and for that kind of game to speak across multiple generations just speaks to how great of a title it is.
One of the greatest of all time. The Legend of Zelda.
I was really torn about which Zelda to include on this list because I do love both of them. And as much as I do love Zelda 2: The Adventure Link, and I think I actually do prefer it over the original Zelda, there's something inherently charming about that original discovery feeling of playing Zelda, especially if you haven't played it in a while or it's your first time playing it, because that kind of awe-inspiring sense of journey and that exploration and, diving into dungeons and fighting monsters and going through all of these different levels to try to explore the world of Hyrule and to defeat Ganon and save Zelda. As much as I love Zelda 2, I don't get that as much as I do with Zelda 1. Now, sure, this doesn't hold a candle to Link to the Past, but it's still a fun game, and it's still something where I can look at it and see, every single thing that was laid out in that first game are things we still get payoffs for today, even in games like Tears of the Kingdom. It's a fantastic game. It's very simplistic in its design by today's standards, but man, I can't help but getting wrapped up when I start playing it again.
There you have it, my friends, 10 more NES games that I keep going back to. Let me know in the comments down below what games you keep going back to on the NES. If you're interested in checking out that original video, that link is up there right now, and there will be a playlist on screen as well, where you can check out the whole series I've done. I've covered things on the NES, the Genesis, Xbox Live Arcade, Xbox 360, a ton of different options. Hey, if you enjoyed today's video, please click that like button down below. I'd really appreciate it. The engagement helps the channel out. And if you are new here and you haven't done so, click that subscribe button as well. I'd love to have you stick around. Till next time, folks, I've been Jay. I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. Remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.